The chamber was a cathedral of silence carved from black neutronium, lit only by the slow pulse of 1,000 holographic stars drifting overhead like lazy fireflies. Every cycle, the interstellar war games convened here in the neutral space, where the galaxy's strongest species gathered to measure claws, minds, and fleets against one another. Pride, territory, and ancient grudges were settled in bloodless contests, mostly. Major Elias Eli Grant stood at the edge of the human delegation, arms folded, jaw tight. 34 years old, skin sun-browned from worlds that no longer existed, eyes the color of deep space after the stars go out. The scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth caught the starlight every time he breathed. He looked bored. Inside, he was counting heartbeats, waiting for something worth dying for. Around the circular pit, the others waited too. The Kale Dominions sat on crystalline thrones that hummed with anti-grav, their 8 eyes blinking out of sync. The Vayari collective hovered in perfect geometric formation, silver orbs linked by threads of living light. The reptilian Sok Fang lounged on heated slabs, tails flicking, tongues tasting fear in the air that wasn't there. Yet, and more, hundreds of species, all ancient, all powerful, all certain they were the apex. At the center of the pit, the Arbiter rose. It had no face, only a shifting lattice of golden code that hurt to look at directly. Its voice arrived inside every skull at once, perfectly translated, perfectly cold. Cycle 3099, final trial, the crucible run. A hush rippled outward. Even the Sok Fang stopped flicking their tails. The Arbiter continued. An artifact of the progenitors lies within the graveyard belt of Carvel, a sphere of unknown composition, 1 meter in diameter, radiating null energy. It drifts through an asteroid field moving at 0.28 c, surrounded by relativistic debris, micro-black holes, and radiation sufficient to flay duranium in microseconds. Retrieval window, 11 minutes 43 seconds. Probability of survival, 0.0003%. Eli felt the numbers hit the room like a gravity hammer. 0.0003. Not even the arrogance of the Kale could swallow that. The Arbiter's lattice flared. The species that returns the artifact will be granted dominion over the Helix arm for 1,000 cycles. Any may volunteer. 1 ship, 1 pilot, no remote drones, no shields rated above Class 4. Begin. Silence became vacuum. Eli watched the delegations. The Vayari dimmed their lights in organic shrug. The Kale clicked their mandibles in polite refusal. One Sok Fang actually laughed, a wet hacking sound, then translated for the rest. We prefer to live. Minutes bled away. The Arbiter waited, patient as entropy. Eli felt the familiar itch behind his ribs, the same itch that had pushed him through the burning skies of Proxima Fall, through the glass deserts of New Mecca, through every graveyard humanity had ever been told to lie down in. He was tired of surviving. He wanted something that would make the dying mean something. He stepped forward. Every alien eye swiveled toward the lone human in worn flight leathers. Humanity volunteers, Eli said. His voice didn't shake. It sounded almost amused. A ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber. The Arbiter's lattice flickered, as if checking its own translation matrix. Major Elias Grant, the Arbiter intoned. You are aware this is designated a suicide mission. Eli grinned, slow and crooked. Ma'am, with respect, you just described Tuesday. Laughter, sharp, startled, escaped from the human delegation behind him. Captain Ruiz clapped a hand over her mouth too late. The sound echoed blasphemously in that ancient hall. Kale Delegate leaned forward, 8 eyes narrowing. 1 ship, 1 pilot. You will cease to exist before you cross the heliopause. Eli shrugged. Better men than me already did. Least I can do is keep the streak going. He felt it then, the eyes of his own people burning holes in his back, some proud, some horrified. His wingman, Lieutenant Park, whispered over private comm, Eli, what the hell are you doing? Buying humanity a legend, he answered, voice low enough only Park could hear. Or a grave. Either one's fine. The Arbiter's lattice spun faster, processing. Very well, humanity is registered. Departure in 6 standard hours, all others dismissed. The chamber began to empty with dignified haste. No one wanted to be near the species that had just embraced extinction for bragging rights. Eli stayed in the pit, staring up at the holographic stars. They looked close enough to touch. He reached up, fingers brushing nothing, and whispered to no one in particular, if you're listening. I could use a Tuesday that doesn't end with my atoms spread across a light year, but if not, he let his hand drop. Thy will be done. Behind him, Captain Ruiz marched up, face pale beneath her tan. Major, you just volunteered us for annihilation. No, ma'am, Eli said, turning to her with that same crooked smile. I volunteered me. The rest of you get to tell the story. Ruiz stared at him a long moment, something like grief in her eyes. Then she surprised him. She saluted, fist to heart, the old way. Then make it a good one, sir. He returned the salute slower, planning on it. As the lights dimmed and the last alien delegation vanished through their portals, Eli stood alone beneath the drifting stars. The itch in his chest had quieted, replaced by something vast and steady. Not peace, never peace, but purpose. He spoke to the empty chamber, voice soft, almost conversational. They think it's suicide. They've never met us on a Tuesday. Far above, unnoticed by any sensor, one of the holographic stars burned just a fraction brighter, as if something or someone had smiled. And in the dark between galaxies, the graveyard belt waited, spinning its blades of stone and shadow, patient as death and twice as hungry. Eli Grant turned toward the exit, boots ringing against neutronium, already hearing the roar of engines that weren't there yet. The humans were coming. The human dock at Neutral Station 9 smelled of scorched metal, coffee, and old prayers. It was a narrow, ribbed corridor lit by flickering sodium strips and the blue-white glare of welding torches. Voices bounced off the walls in a dozen Earth dialects, overlapping, laughing, cursing. Someone was singing an old Martian hymn off-key while plasma cutters screamed in harmony. Eli walked through it all like a man already half-ghost. His ship waited at Bay 17, crouched on mag clamps like a predator forced to kneel. The USS Reckless Abandon was 60 years old if she was a day, a dagger-shaped interceptor from the Orion War retrofitted so many times that half her hull plates didn't match. Her name had been stenciled in fresh white paint that still smelled wet. Someone had added beneath it, in smaller letters, because Prudent was taken. Lieutenant Park met him at the ramp, grease on her cheek, eyes red from no sleep. "You sure about this crate, boss? She's held together with spit and spite." Eli ran a hand along the scarred flank. The metal was warm, almost feverish. "She's ugly, underpowered, and leaks radiation in 3 places. Perfect," Park snorted. "Romantic." Inside, the cockpit was barely big enough for 2. Every surface was worn smooth by generations of pilots who'd flown her and somehow walked away. The seat had a permanent dent shaped like Eli's spine from the 2 weeks he'd spent ferrying refugees out of the Tau Ceti collapse. He sat down and the ship sighed around him, a sound like an old dog happy to see its master. He keyed the pre-flight. The HUD flickered, coughed, then painted the cockpit blood red with warnings. Radiation shielding, 43%. Inertial dampeners, 61%. Life support, 118 minutes at full burn. Someone had overclocked it and never told command. Main drive, nominal, whatever the hell that meant this week. Eli grinned at the numbers the way another man might grin at a lover's flaws. "Morning, girl," he murmured. "Ready to go make history?" The ship answered with a low, hungry thrum that vibrated through his bones. Park leaned in through the hatch, holding out a small silver crucifix on a worn chain. "My abuela's. She said it brought my dad home from Ganymede. Figured you could use the mileage." Eli took it without mockery. The metal was warm from her hand. He slipped it over his neck. The cross settled against his sternum like it belonged there. "Tell your abuelo I'll try not to lose it," he said. Park's smile wobbled. "Tell her yourself when you get back." He didn't answer that, couldn't. The bay doors irised open, revealing the hard glitter of the graveyard belt light years away, already visible through the station's real viewport like a broken halo. Somewhere in that spinning grinder of stone and shadow waited the progenitor sphere. Eli sealed the canopy. The cockpit lights dimmed to combat orange. "Control, this is Reckless Abandon, requesting departure vector." A pause, then the human controller, voice thick. "Abandon, you are cleared direct to hell. Godspeed, Eli. Copy that. See you on the other side." He eased the throttle forward. The old girl growled, shrugged off the mag clamps, and slid into the black like she'd been born for it. Behind him, the station shrank to a spark, then nothing. Ahead, the belt grew teeth. Eli opened a private channel back to the human delegation lounge. He knew they were all watching, the entire species holding its breath through borrowed eyes. "Hey," he said, voice calm, almost lazy. "Quick head count. How many of you bet I'd be dead before breakfast?" A chorus of groans and laughter flooded the channel. Captain Ruiz's voice cut through. "Focus, Major." "Yes, ma'am, just making sure my life insurance is paid up." He killed the chatter, then reached up and flicked a switch no military manual had ever acknowledged. An ancient media player, jury-rigged into the comm suite, woke up and began to play Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire at low volume. Eli leaned back, fingers dancing across the controls. "All right, old girl. Just you and me and 11 minutes of impossible. Let's dance." The Reckless Abandon rolled once, a lazy barrel roll of pure joy, then lit her engines blue-white and punched toward the graveyard belt at a speed that made the stars smear into knives. Inside the cockpit, the silver crucifix glinted each time the drive flared. Eli didn't pray, not exactly. He just spoke into the dark between verses. "If you're out there, I'm not asking for a miracle. Just don't let me screw this up too badly." The belt rushed up to swallow him whole. Somewhere behind in the delegation lounge, a young ensign whispered to no one in particular, "He's smiling. Look at the telemetry, he's actually smiling." And in the silence between heartbeats, one of the distant stars burned just a little brighter again, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. The graveyard belt didn't look like a place. It looked like the end of every story ever told. Eli's forward scopes painted it in layers of screaming red and ultraviolet, a cylinder of shattered worlds 2 light minutes wide, spinning around a dead neutron star like a blender made of knives. Asteroids the size of continents tumbled end over end at 28% the speed of light. Micro black holes blinked in and out of existence, chewing light and spitting Hawking radiation. The entire volume glowed with Cherenkov blue from particles slamming into one another faster than physics preferred. Eli's HUD painted the retrieval window in pulsing amber. T-minus 11 minutes 43 seconds to optimal intercept. T-minus 11 minutes 44 seconds to certain death. He killed the music. Johnny Cash had no business here. The reckless abandon dropped her fusion torch to a whisper and coasted in on momentum alone, a shark sliding into deep water. Eli's hands moved without conscious thought, trimming attitude, bleeding velocity, letting the old ship feel the currents of gravity the way a surfer feels a wave. "Talk to me, girl," he muttered. "Where's the hole?" The nav computer spat out a probability cloud, a jagged red tunnel maybe 40 meters wide threading between two continent-sized rocks on collision course. The tunnel existed for exactly 11 minutes before the rocks kissed and turned everything inside a light second into plasma. 40 meters, his wingspan was 38. Eli laughed once, short and sharp. "Tuesday it is." He rolled the ship until the tunnel lined up dead center, then lit the main drive in a single, savage pulse. The abandon leaped forward, inertial dampeners screaming at 9.2 G before they caught up. Eli's vision tunneled, blood roaring in his ears, the crucifix slamming against his chest hard enough to bruise. The first asteroid filled the canopy like a wall of rust and night. Craters big enough to swallow cities yawned open, edges glowing white-hot from impacts. Eli flew straight at one of those craters, then flicked the ship sideways at the last possible heartbeat, threading a fissure no sane pilot would even look at. Stone scraped duranium. Sparks exploded across the canopy as micrometeorites turned to molten rain. Alarms howled hull breach in frame 7, radiation spike, port stabilizer fluttering. Eli ignored them all. He was inside the mountain now, engines dark, riding inertia through a canyon that narrowed to 20 meters 1510. His breath fogged the inside of his helmet. "Not today," he told the rock. "Not like dying in the dark." The fissure spat him out the far side into a pocket of clear space no wider than a city block. For 3 impossible seconds the scopes were empty except for the progenitor sphere hanging in the exact center, perfect, matte black, drinking every photon that touched it. Eli's heart tried to climb out of his throat. "There you are." He kicked the lateral thrusters, spinning the abandoned belly up relative to the sphere. Magnetic grapples fired thump thump thump, locking on with a sound like God closing a gate. "Package secured," he reported, voice calm again, almost bored. "Beginning exfil." That was when the tunnel behind him collapsed. The two continent rocks kissed at 0.28 C. The impact flashed brighter than a supernova, a wall of gamma and shattered stone racing outward at relativistic speed. The shockwave hit the abandon like a freight train made of suns. The ship tumbled. Alarms became one continuous scream. Eli fought the stick with both hands and his teeth, trying to keep the sphere from shearing off. Centrifugal force pinned him to the seat. The G-meter redlined and kept climbing. For a moment he saw his mother's face. Sunday mornings in the little church on Luna, dust motes dancing in colored light through the stained glass dome. She was singing "It Is Well." He could hear her voice clear as vacuum. Eli laughed again, wild and free. "Guess what Ma still is." He slammed the emergency attitude jets, bleeding every erg of stored power into a single brutal maneuver. The abandoned cartwheeled, sphere swinging like a wrecking ball, and somehow slid sideways into a fracture between two smaller rocks just as the gamma front flashed past. Darkness returned, sudden and absolute. The shockwave missed them by less than 2 kilometers. Inside the cockpit, emergency lighting painted everything blood red. Half the consoles were dead. The sphere hung below the belly like a black heart. Eli floated in his harness, lungs burning, tasting copper. He keyed the all-channel broadcast before he could think better of it. "Hey, Galaxy," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Still here, still breathing. Tell you what, y'all can keep your safe Tuesday. I'll take mine with a side of impossible." Static answered. Then faintly cheers, human voices, hundreds of them, echoing across light years through every relay humanity owned. Eli let his head fall back against the rest. The crucifix was warm against his skin, warmer than blood or plasma fire. He closed his eyes for 1 second. "Thanks," he whispered, not to the ship, not to luck, to the quiet intelligence he'd felt watching since the moment he stepped into that neutronium chamber. The scopes pinged. New threat. A micro-black hole, freshly born from the collision, spiraling straight toward them on an interception vector measured in seconds. Eli's eyes snapped open. The laugh that came out this time was almost gentle. "Of course there is." He reached for the throttle with fingers that didn't shake at all. And in the perfect dark between dying stars, the reckless abandon lit her engines once more. Blue-white, defiant, alive, racing a hole in space-time that devoured hope the way fire devours oxygen. The micro-black hole was beautiful in the way a guillotine is beautiful, perfect, inevitable, and hungry. It was no larger than a grain of sand, but it mass-spagged the starfield into a spiral of blue-shifted light, a whirlpool with the reckless abandon caught on the edge. The ship groaned as spacetime itself stretched her bones. Metal screamed. The sphere locked to the belly began to swing like a pendulum, threatening to tear the grapples free. Eli's HUD painted the event horizon in pulsing crimson, impact in 47 seconds. He had 47 seconds to outrun a thing that ate time. He killed every non-essential system, life support, lights, even the gravity plate, and dumped the power straight into the main drive. The Abandon surged forward, engines howling at 110% rated thrust. The frame shuddered, rivets popped like gunfire. 39 seconds. The black hole accelerated, feeding on the debris it devoured, growing fatter with every gram. Tidal forces clawed at the ship. Eli felt his harness bite into his shoulders as the cockpit tried to become longer than it was. He needed an angle, any angle. His eyes flicked to the tactical overlay. There are two asteroids the size of mountains, tumbling toward each other on a near-miss vector. If he could thread the needle between them at the exact moment their gravity wells overlapped, it was suicide squared. It was also the only vector that put solid mass between him and the hole. Eli laughed again, softer this time, almost tender. "Lord," he said conversationally, "I'm about to do something stupider than usual. Little help." He rolled the ship until the sphere was pointed straight at the closing gap, then slammed the throttle to the stop. The Abandon became a bullet fired down a shrinking rifle barrel. 22 seconds. The asteroids filled the canopy, jagged cathedral spires of iron and ice, spinning majestically toward collision. Eli flew straight at the place they would occupy in 12 seconds, trusting math and muscle memory and something older than both. 15 seconds. Gravity from both rocks began to fight the black hole, tearing the ship in 3 directions at once. The hull plating on the starboard wing buckled with a sound like a dying god. 10 seconds. He was going to be too early. The gap was still 50 meters too narrow. Eli did the only thing left. He cut the engines entirely and let raw inertia carry him. The sudden silence was deafening. The Abandon drifted, a dead leaf in a hurricane of stone and gravity. Eli's hands left the controls. He folded them in his lap like a man waiting for a bus. 5 seconds. The asteroids kissed, not a collision, just a graze, but enough. Their gravity wells overlapped in a single, perfect lens that bent spacetime like glass. The black hole's accretion disk warped, flared, and for one impossible heartbeat, the tidal forces canceled each other out. The reckless Abandon slid through the gap with 3 meters to spare on either side. Behind her, the asteroids clipped, spun, and shattered into a storm of relativistic shrapnel. The newborn black hole plunged straight into the largest fragment and devoured it whole, flashing once like a camera bulb before evaporating in a final hawking scream. The shockwave slapped the Abandon from behind, kicking her forward like a mule. Eli's head snapped back, stars exploded across his vision. Then quiet, real quiet, the kind you only get far from suns. He floated in the harness, breathing through his mouth, tasting blood and ozone. The cockpit was dark except for the faint green glow of the emergency panel, the sphere secure, engines cold but intact. He was alive. Eli let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob, then covered it with a cough. He keyed the all-channel again. "Hey, Galaxy," he croaked. "You still there?" Static. Then a single voice, Captain Ruiz, almost afraid to hope. "Eli, status." He looked at the sphere hanging below the ship, blacker than the space around it, drinking starlight like wine. "Got your damn artifact," he said. "Also owe the Almighty a beer." A pause. Then the channel exploded, cheers, prayers, someone openly weeping. He heard Park screaming his name like a battle cry. Eli closed his eyes. The crucifix was burning hot against his skin now, almost painful. He didn't move to take it off. In the silence that followed, he spoke, not on comms, just to the dark. "I don't know why you keep letting me win," he whispered, "but I'm starting to think you like the story." Far away in the human delegation lounge, an old admiral who hadn't cried since the fall of Earth put his face in his hands and said, voice shaking, "That boy just made God laugh." On the scopes, a new signature appeared, clean, impossible, cutting through the debris field like a knife through silk. A corridor, not random, not natural. A path of clear space opening straight toward home, asteroids nudged aside as if by invisible hands. Eli stared at it for a long moment. Then he reached forward, fingers gentle, and reignited the engines. The reckless Abandon turned her scarred nose toward the corridor of grace and began the long ride home, slow, steady, triumphant. Behind her, the graveyard belt kept spinning, grinding worlds to dust. Ahead of her, the stars burned a little brighter. And somewhere, for the first time in his life, Eli Grant was not in a hurry to die. The corridor shouldn't have existed. Eli watched it on the long-range scopes, a tunnel of calm 200,000 kilometers long and widening, asteroids sliding aside like theater curtains, micro black holes winking out as though someone had flipped a switch. Debris that had danced to relativistic chaos for 1 billion years now moved with the polite choreography of a waltz. He flew down the center at a cautious quarter thrust, half expecting the universe to remember itself and slam the gates. It didn't. The reckless Abandon glided through vacuum so clean it felt sanctified. Eli's hands stayed loose on the stick. He was afraid to breathe too hard, afraid the miracle might notice it was a mistake and correct itself. The cockpit was quiet except for the soft click of cooling metal and the slow, steady beat of his own heart. The sphere hung beneath the ship, silent and perfect, reflecting nothing. He opened the all channel again, voice low, almost reverent. Control, you seeing this? Ruiz answered immediately. We see it, Eli. Every scope from here to Sol sees it. The Kale are having a collective stroke. The Vayari just asked if humanity has a god they haven't catalogued. Eli huffed a laugh that hurt his cracked ribs. Tell them we're still arguing about that ourselves. He let the silence stretch, then added softer. Tell them the corridor's real, and it's beautiful. Another voice cut in Park, tears thick in her throat. Come home, boss, just come home. Working on it, kid. He flew for an hour like that, slow and careful, as if the ship were made of glass. Every few minutes, another impossible thing happened. A tumbling mountain of nickel iron altered course by a fraction of a degree, just enough. A radiation burst flattened itself against nothing and vanished. Once, a relativistic shard the size of Manhattan passed within 10 kilometers and simply disintegrated into glittering dust that fell away like snow. Eli watched it all with the stillness of a man in church. Eventually, he reached up and killed every light in the cockpit except the faint green glow of the master caution panel. Darkness folded around him, intimate and kind. Stars burned ahead through the canopy, closer now, warmer. He spoke into that darkness, not a prayer exactly, more like a conversation with an old friend who'd shown up exactly when needed. I've spent my whole life running toward the fire, he said. Thought if I burned bright enough, hot enough, someone would remember we were here. But this, he glanced down at the sphere, at the corridor painted across the scopes. This isn't me, I'm good, but I'm not this good. He rested his forehead against the cool yoke. So if this is you, thank you, and if it's not. Thank you anyway for the loaning me the story. The crucifix pulsed once against his chest, warm as a heartbeat. A new signal pinged, tight beam, human encryption, Ruiz again. Eli, we're picking up an escort, 12 o'clock high, looks like wait. Her voice cracked with wonder. They're ours. Every damn ship humanity could scramble. Frigates, corvettes, even the old museum carrier Yorktown. They formed up in perfect wings and they're burning hard to meet you. Eli looked up. There they were, running lights blazing against the dark. Contrails of fusion fire painting the corridor blue and gold. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of souls who had watched a single madman fly into hell and decided the least they could do was light the way out. The lead frigate, USS Audacity, rolled once in salute as it took station off his starboard wing. Her captain's voice came over guard frequency, rough with unshed tears. Welcome home, Major. Formation is yours. Eli swallowed hard. When he answered, his voice was steady. Negative, Audacity. I'm just the package delivery boy today. You've got the con. A pause, then quietly. Copy that, sir. Then follow us in. Music on 3 mark. Every external light on every human ship strobed in perfect unison. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The ancient Morse for victory. Eli felt his eyes burn. He blinked it away fast. Music it is, he said. He eased the throttle forward, tucking the battered abandon into the center of the formation like a chick returning to the flock. Engines sang in harmony all around him, a choir of blue fire. Behind them, the corridor began to close, gently, gracefully, asteroids drifting back into chaos as though the hand that had parted them had simply opened. Ahead, the neutral station grew from a spark to a wheel of silver and gold. Eli looked at the sphere one more time. It was still black, still perfect. But now, if he squinted, he thought he saw the faintest shimmer deep inside, like starlight trying to be born. He smiled, tired and alive and unafraid. Tuesday's almost over, he told it. Let's go see what Wednesday brings. The fleet roared toward home, and the stars themselves seemed to lean in, listening. Neutral Station 9 had never been designed to hold this many humans at once. The main concourse, built for the measured footfalls of Kale crystal boots and the silent glide of Vayari orbs, now thrummed with boots, laughter, and the low thunder of 1,000 voices speaking at once. Someone had cracked the emergency liquor stores. Someone else had started a hymn that half the crowd knew and the other half was learning on the fly. Eli walked through it all like a man underwater. They had pulled the reckless abandon into the largest bay with tractor beams and silk gloves. Technicians swarmed her like ants on a wounded queen, touching the scorched hull with something close to reverence. The sphere had been transferred to an anti-grav cradle under Marine Guard, still black, still drinking light, still refusing every scan. But the crowd wasn't here for the sphere. They were here for him. Hands reached out, calloused pilot hands, soft civilian hands, a child's small fingers that slipped a paper crane into his pocket. Someone pressed a cup of real coffee into his grip. It tasted like burnt heaven. A woman in an old UN Navy jacket kissed his scarred cheek and whispered, "Thank you for coming back," before the tide carried her away. Eli kept moving, nodding, smiling when he had to, until he found a quiet corner behind a cargo crate and simply leaned his forehead against the cool bulkhead. The noise faded to a dull roar in his ears. His legs shook. Delayed shock, probably. Or maybe just the weight of being looked at like he was something more than a man who'd once wanted to die loud. A shadow fell across him. Captain Ruiz stood there, eyes red-rimmed but steady. She didn't salute. She just looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and straightened the crooked silver crucifix that had ridden through hell with him. You kept it, she said. Wasn't mine to lose. She nodded once, as if that settled something ancient between them. Then she handed him a small, battered book, real paper, edges soft from generations of thumbs. A New Testament, the kind chaplains carried on dropships. Page 263, she said. Read it when you're ready, out loud if you want. The whole station will shut up and listen, I guarantee it. Eli took the book. His fingers left greasy prints on the cover. I'm not a preacher, Captain. You're not a courier either, she replied. But you just delivered something bigger than that sphere. Figure out what it is before the galaxy does. She left him there. He stayed in the shadow of the crate a while longer, turning the little book over in his hands. Finally, he opened it to the marked page, Psalm 107. He read the first line under his breath. They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters, these see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. His voice cracked on the last word. Behind him, the crowd noise dipped for no reason anyone could name. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Even the hymn trailed off mid-verse. Eli didn't notice. He just kept reading, quietly at first, then stronger, the words tasting like salt and blood and starlight. For he commandeth, and raiseth the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They reel to and fro, and stagger like a drunken man, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. By the time he reached the part about the Lord making the storm be still, half the concourse had gone silent. The other half joined in on the refrain they all somehow knew by heart. So he bringeth them unto their desired haven. The last word hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Eli closed the book. When he turned around, every human in sight, soldiers, civilians, children, old men who'd fought at Sirius, stood with heads bowed or eyes shining. No one cheered. They didn't need to. The silence was louder than any victory shout. Then slowly, one by one, they began to applaud. Not the frantic clapping of a crowd, but the steady, measured rhythm of respect, like a heartbeat, like a war drum, like a promise. Eli stood there and let it wash over him until he couldn't breathe. Eventually, the Arbiter's lattice appeared above the central dais, golden code spinning faster than anyone had ever seen it move. Major Elias Grant, it intoned, and even its perfect voice carried something that might have been awe. The artifact has been authenticated. By the ancient accords of Cycle 1, the Helix arm is awarded to humanity for 1,000 cycles. The applause stopped as if cut by a knife. Every alien delegation stood frozen. The Kale's crystalline thrones dimmed. The Vayari orbs flickered in patterns that translated across 17 languages to stunned disbelief. Eli looked up at the lattice. Tell them the arm's not ours to take, he said, voice carrying effortlessly in the hush. It's theirs to share, same as always. We just came to pick up some trash and go home. A ripple moved through the alien ranks, confusion, suspicion, something that might become respect if it lived long enough. The Arbiter hesitated, and eternal intelligence actually hesitated, then spoke again. Your species declines the prize. We decline the cage, Eli said. We'll take the story, that's enough. He stepped down from the dais before anyone could argue. Later, much later, when the station lights dimmed to night cycle and most of the celebration had moved to the bars, Eli stood alone on an observation blister overlooking the stars. The graveyard belt was only a faint smudge now, its teeth pulled, its storms quieted. He felt someone approach, soft footfalls he knew. Park stopped beside him, hands in her pockets, eyes on the same dark. Whole galaxies calling us insane, she said. Old news. They're also calling us saints. Eli snorted. Definitely new. Silence stretched, comfortable and worn in. Finally, Park asked the question everyone wanted to, but no one else dared. Was it really him, Eli? Or did we just get lucky in ways physics can't explain? He didn't answer right away. He reached up and touched the crucifix, then looked out at the million stars. I don't know what luck is anymore, he said, but I know what a corridor looks like when the Red Sea decides to part. Park rested her head against his shoulder just for a second. Below them, the reckless abandon sat in her bay, scarred and ugly and perfect, floodlights painting her hull gold. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, something vast and quiet kept watch, not a king on a throne, not a judge with a gavel, but a father who had watched his reckless child run into the fire, and when the fire got too hot, simply moved the stars aside so the child could come home for supper. Eli smiled, small and tired and real. Tuesday's over, he whispered to the night. Let's see what he's got planned for Wednesday. Behind him, unnoticed, the progenitor sphere, locked now in a vault no sensor could pierce, pulsed once with soft inner light, as if something inside had finally decided to wake up. The vault was a cube of neutronium 30 meters on a side, buried under 3 kilometers of station armor and ringed by every defensive field humanity could beg, borrow, or steal. Inside it, the progenitor sphere floated in perfect stillness, held by nothing, reflecting nothing, until it wasn't still anymore. At 03:17 station time, every alarm in the security net went white at once. Not red, white, the color reserved for events the designers had never imagined. Eli was already awake, sitting in the darkened cockpit of the reckless abandon with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the stars like they owed him an explanation. When the klaxon howled through the bays, he didn't flinch. He just sighed, set the cup down, and started walking. By the time he reached the vault corridor, half the station's Marines had formed a perimeter, and the other half were trying to look like they weren't terrified. Captain Ruiz met him at the final blast door, face drawn. "It's singing," she said without greeting. Eli raised an eyebrow. "Come again? Not sound. Math. The sphere is broadcasting a carrier wave in pure higher dimensional geometry. Our linguists are crying." The Vayari delegation just asked for asylum because the pattern tastes like the voice their gods stopped using 1 billion years ago. Eli rubbed the scar along his jaw. "So Tuesday's not over." Ruiz almost smiled. "Not even close." They cycled the door. Inside, the cube was dark except for the sphere. It had risen to the exact center of the chamber and now glowed with a light that had no color. Humans had a name for something that lived between ultraviolet and grace. Concentric rings of symbols rotated around it, not projected, not etched, simply there, turning like the thoughts of something ancient remembering how to speak. Every human in the room, soldiers, scientists, 2 chaplains who'd shown up with no orders, felt the same thing at the same moment, the sudden, dizzying awareness of being watched by something that had watched the first hydrogen atoms cool. Eli stepped forward alone. The Marines parted without thinking about it. The sphere's voice arrived inside his skull the way the arbiters had, but warmer, older, patient as stone and twice as kind. "Elias Grant, you carried me through the dark. Will you carry me a little farther?" He didn't ask how it knew his name. "Depends," he said aloud. "Where we going? Home." The single word unfolded inside him like a memory he'd never lived. Green hills under a yellow sun, laughter of children who hadn't been born yet, the smell of rain on soil that didn't exist anymore because Earth was ash and memory. Eli's throat closed. "Earth's gone," he said, rough. "Been gone 300 years. Not the planet, the idea, the promise you forgot you were keeping." The symbols slowed, became almost gentle. "I am the last seed of those who went before you. They left me in sorrow, believing the younger races would destroy themselves. They were half right. You were half wrong. Now the circle closes." Eli felt the crucifix burn against his chest again, not painful this time, more like a hand resting over his heart. He looked back at Ruiz, at the Marines, at the chaplains clutching their books like shields, at Park who had slipped in behind him with wide, wondering eyes. Then he looked at the sphere again. "What do you need from us?" "Everything you have already given. Faith without proof, courage without reward, love that refuses to surrender the story." A pause, almost shy, and "One more Tuesday." Eli laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing strangely in that impossible light. "Lady, you came to the right species." He stepped forward until he stood directly beneath the sphere. The glow wrapped around him like sunrise. "Tell me what to do. Carry you where? Where the graveyard becomes garden." The symbols flared once, bright enough to cast shadows that had no source. When vision returned, the sphere had settled into Eli's outstretched hands. It weighed nothing and everything. Warm, like a child's fevered forehead. Every screen in the vault lit up with the same image of a single planet, blue, living, impossibly young, orbiting a quiet yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm. Coordinates followed, burned directly into the navigation cores of every human ship within a light year, whether they were powered on or not. Ruiz found her voice first. "That system's been dark since the progenitor exodus. No radio, no heat, nothing." Eli looked down at the sphere cradled against his chest. It pulsed once like a second heartbeat. "Looks like somebody left the porch light on." He turned to the room. "Pack your toothbrushes, people. We're going home for supper." No one asked how. No one asked why now. They simply moved, Marines slinging rifles with the absent ease of men who suddenly remembered they were pilgrims, scientists weeping openly as they downloaded the coordinates, chaplains falling to their knees right there on the deck. Park caught Eli's sleeve. "You scared?" He considered the question seriously. "Terrified," he admitted, "but the good kind, the kind that means something worth being scared for just showed up." Above them, unnoticed in the rush, the station's main viewport showed the stars shifting subtle, almost shy, as if the galaxy itself were turning its face toward a road it had forgotten it once walked. Eli looked at the sphere, then at the crucifix, then at the impossible living world waiting somewhere beyond the dark. He smiled the same crooked smile that had faced down death a dozen times and found it wanting. "Reckless abandons fueled and ready," he said. "Who's coming with me to plant a garden?" Every hand in the vault went up. Far away, in the place where physics ends and story begins, something vast and quiet exhaled in satisfaction. The seed had found its soil, and humanity, reckless, stubborn, half-broken, half-holy humanity, rolled up its sleeves and prepared to do what it had always done best, turn the impossible into Tuesday. The first sunrise on New Eden, they never debated the name. It simply arrived on every tongue at once, was the color of forgiven sins. Eli stood barefoot on a grassy hill that hadn't existed 48 hours earlier, watching the light spill over a valley where the first tents were already becoming houses. Children chased each other through knee-high wheat that had sprouted overnight. Someone was playing a guitar. Someone else was crying and laughing at the same time. The air smelled like rain on warm stone and bread baking, and every good thing humanity had ever lost. He wore an old flight jacket with the sleeves torn off and the silver crucifix glinting against sun-browned skin. The scar on his face caught the light the same way it had in the neutronium chamber a lifetime ago. Park found him there, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Coffee black, slightly radioactive, she said, handing him one. Just like you like it. He took it, wrapped both hands around the warmth. Thought we were done with radiation. Old habits. Besides, the beans grew in 3 hours. Figured they earned the right to taste dangerous. They drank in silence, watching shuttles drift down like white birds. Each one carried families who had never seen a horizon without bulkheads. Each one sighed. Eventually Park asked the question everyone was afraid to voice. Do you think it's really ours, forever? Eli looked at the tree on the far ridge, the tree, they called it now. Its leaves were every shade of gold and green, and when the wind moved through them, the sound was like 10,000 voices saying welcome home at once. Nothing S forever, he said, but this one comes close. He took another sip, then added, softer. We were given a garden once before, screwed it up in a week. This time we know how expensive grace is. Might be enough to keep us humble. Park nudged him with her shoulder. You planning to stay humble, major suicide mission? He laughed, the sound easy now, no sharp edges left. I'm planning to plant apple trees and teach kids how to fly. After that, we'll see. Below them, a little girl with braids and hair handed a fish out of the river and held it up to the sky like an offering. Her mother laughed so hard she sat down in the grass and couldn't stand up again. Eli felt his eyes sting. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. Ruiz climbed the hill a few minutes later, boots muddy, hair loose for the first time anyone could remember. She carried a bottle of something amber and illegal. Found this in the Yorktown's captain's locker, she announced. Figured the end of exile deserves a toast. They passed the bottle. The whiskey burned clean like forgiveness. Ruiz looked out over the valley, eyes shining. Whole galaxy S in chaos, she said. Kale are sending diplomats. Vayari want to study the tree. Zokfang asked if they can hunt here politely. Everyone wants to know what we paid for this place. Eli took another slow swallow. Tell them we paid with a Tuesday, he said. And with every day we refuse to stop believing tomorrow might be worth waking up for. Ruiz nodded, understanding perfectly. Far out on the plain, the reckless abandon sat on her landing struts, already half covered in flowering vines someone had coaxed up the landing gear. Children were painting her scarred hull with handprints, red, blue, yellow, like a promise that she would never fly angry again. Eli watched them for a long time. Then he reached up, unclasped the silver crucifix, and pressed it into Park's hand. Give this to the first kid born today, he said. Tell them the story, all of it. The fire, the corridor, the Tuesday nobody else wanted. Tell them what it cost. Tell them what it bought. Park closed her fingers around the chain. You sure? He looked at the tree, at the children, at the sky turning from rose to gold. I'm not the keeper anymore, he said. We all are. He started down the hill toward the settlement, whistling the same off-key hymn someone had sung in the docks a lifetime ago. Behind him, Park and Ruiz stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the man who had once raced death for glory walk slow and steady toward a future he finally wanted to live long enough to see. Years later, decades, centuries, when humanity had spread across 100 living worlds and the story of the Graveyard Run had become legend, pilgrims still came to that first hill. They found a simple stone there, rough-hewn, no bigger than a man's heart. Carved into it were 7 words and a date. The aliens called it a suicide mission. Humans called it Tuesday. We came home anyway. Underneath, smaller, almost shy. He kept the light on. No one ever added anything else. Nothing else was needed. And on clear evenings, when the twin moons rose and the tree sang its quiet song across the valley, old pilots, gray now, laughing at scars, would gather the children around fires that smelled like apple wood and tell them how a broken ship and a reckless man and a god who refused to give up on either carried every lost child of Earth across the dark on nothing but faith and engine fire. The children always asked the same question in the end. Did it really happen? The old pilots would smile, touch the little silver crosses the kids wore, and answer the only way truth ever answers. Kid, they'd say, every good Tuesday still does. Far above, in a sky no longer empty, the stars burned steady and kind, and the tree kept growing, patient as mercy, vast as love, reaching always toward a light that had never once moved aside galaxies just to let a single reckless species come home for supper. And somewhere in the place where stories end and forever begins, Elias Grant, barefoot, laughing, finally truly alive, stood on a hill that looked exactly like the first one and watched new children chase fireflies under a yellow sun. He raised a cup of coffee that never went cold and toasted the dark. Thanks for the Tuesday, he said. The dark smiled back, warm as a father's hand on a prodigal's shoulder, and answered in a voice made of every dawn that ever was or will be. Any time, son. Any time at all.